A. A. Allen was one of the most controversial and influential healing evangelists of the 20th century. To some, he was a man mightily used by God, through whom undeniable miracles took place. To others, he was a deeply flawed individual, whose personal struggles cast long shadows over his ministry. Yet, to understand A. A. Allen only through one lens is to miss the full truth of his story. A story of calling, faith, human weakness, and lasting spiritual lessons. Asa Alonzo Allen was born on March 27, 1911, in Sulphur Rock, Arkansas, into a life marked by hardship from the very beginning. His early years were shaped by instability, poverty, and pain. Raised in a broken home, Allen experienced abandonment and neglect, circumstances that left deep emotional scars. These early wounds would later influence both his spiritual passion and his personal battles. As a young man, Allen encountered God in a way that would forever alter the course of his life. He gave his life to Christ and soon felt a strong call into ministry. However, his journey into faith was not immediate triumph. He struggled deeply with insecurity, fear, and alcoholism, a battle he would fight for much of his life. Allen's early ministry was humble and difficult. He pastored small churches, often with little financial support, and faced rejection from congregations that doubted his calling or methods. At times, he felt overwhelmed by failure and inadequacy. Yet, in these moments of desperation, Allen sought God with intensity. He fasted, prayed, and cried out for divine help, believing that without God's power, he could not succeed. A turning point came when Allen experienced what he described as a profound spiritual encounter, a moment of total surrender. He testified that God delivered him from alcohol and renewed his calling with clarity and power. From that moment, his ministry took on a new direction. Allen became deeply committed to preaching divine healing, deliverance, and faith in the supernatural power of God. In the late 1940s and 1950s, A. A. Allen emerged as a prominent figure in the healing revival movement sweeping across the United States. Large tents were erected in cities and towns, drawing thousands of people desperate for healing, hope, and spiritual renewal. Allen's meetings were intense, emotional, and dramatic. He preached with urgency, conviction, and boldness, often emphasizing repentance, faith, and complete dependence on God. Testimonies began to pour in. People claimed to be healed of blindness, deafness, paralysis, cancer, and chronic illnesses. Some testified that they had thrown away crutches, wheelchairs, and braces after prayer. Allen insisted that all healing came from God, not from him, and frequently reminded audiences that faith was key. Not faith in a man, but faith in Jesus Christ. His ministry grew rapidly. Radio broadcasts carried his sermons across the nation. His magazine, Miracle Magazine, spread testimonies of healing and deliverance. Allen became a household name among believers who longed to see the power of God move in tangible ways. Yet, as his influence grew, so did scrutiny. Critics questioned the authenticity of the miracles and accused Allen of exaggeration or manipulation. Others were disturbed by his confrontational preaching style, which openly rebuked sin and warned of judgment. Allen was unapologetic. He believed the church had grown comfortable and powerless, and he saw himself as a voice calling believers back to holiness and faith. Behind the scenes, however, Allen continued to battle personal demons. Though he testified of deliverance from alcohol, struggles with addiction resurfaced at different points in his life. These struggles did not erase the testimonies associated with his ministry, but they complicated his legacy and raised painful questions about the cost of unchecked pressure, isolation, and emotional wounds. In 1955, Allen faced a public scandal when he was arrested for drunkenness. The incident shocked supporters and critics alike. For many, it was devastating. A healer, preacher, and revivalist caught in a very human failure. Allen did not deny the incident. Instead, he admitted his struggle, though the consequences were severe. He was dismissed from the Assemblies of God, the denomination with which he had been affiliated. This moment marked a profound crossroads in Alan's life. Some expected his ministry to end there. Others turned away in disappointment. But Alan continued independently, convinced that God had not abandoned him. He acknowledged his weakness and often spoke openly about the dangers of pride, pressure, and spiritual burnout. His message increasingly emphasized not only faith for miracles, but also humility and dependence on God's grace. Despite controversy, reports of healings continued. People still came to his meetings, desperate for hope. Alan's services remained emotionally charged, filled with prayer, worship, and expectation. He often warned young ministers about the dangers of neglecting their personal walk with God, speaking from painful experience. As the years passed, the physical and emotional toll of ministry weighed heavily on him. The demands of constant travel, public expectations, and internal struggles created a heavy burden. Yet, Alan remained driven by a belief that God could still move powerfully through him, despite his flaws. In June 1970, A. Allen died suddenly at the age of 59. His death shocked the Christian world and reignited debates about his life and ministry. Some focused on his failures. Others remembered the countless testimonies of healing, deliverance, and lives changed through his preaching. Today, A. Allen's story remains complex and deeply instructive. He reminds believers that God can move powerfully through imperfect people, but also that spiritual gifting does not replace character, accountability, or inner healing. His life is a warning against isolation and unaddressed wounds, but also a testimony to God's mercy and willingness to work through broken vessels. For graceful guidance, the lesson is clear. Faith is powerful, but it must be nurtured with humility, community, and continual surrender. Alan's life calls believers not to idolize ministers, but to fix their eyes on Christ alone, the true source of healing, power, and redemption. His story is not one of simple triumph or simple failure. It is the story of a man who burned brightly, struggled deeply, and left behind lessons that still speak to the church today. Some lives inspire through perfection. Others inspire through honesty. Alan's legacy belongs to the latter, a reminder that God's grace is real, His power is undeniable, and His work continues, even through imperfect hands.
If you enjoyed this video and want more, please like, subscribe, and share.